How's it going, crypto community and XRP Martians? You're now watching the Martian Report, and this is part 6? I think part 6. Correct me. Yeah, I'm certain this is part 6. At any rate, we're watching the next panelist, Norman Chan, at the SNB Research Conference. Now, Mr. Chan is the director of the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, which is the de facto central bank of Hong Kong, for those who aren't aware. So it's kind of a big deal. Now, as far as the Hong Kong Monetary Authority being related to Ripple, we have evidence of their connections stemming back all the way to 2016. I'm seeing an article from December of 2016 discussing Ripple and the HKM or HKMA, as well as Hong Kong's Lian to use Ripple for payments, and that being announced last February 2018. So, again, just to drive home, every single person on this panel is pro-Ripple, right? If they're not pro-Ripple outwardly so, themselves individually, their organization is at least working with this man right here's organization, right? So I just want to drive that home. I like to give a little bit of insight into who you're listening to before we start listening to these people, with the hopes that it makes you really engage with them so that you can be paying attention to what they're saying, so that, even though I'm going to interrupt them through their talks and put whatever they're saying in layman's terms, and give my twist on it, I really encourage you to be paying attention to how they're speaking and pay attention to the words they're using, and see if you can, if you're not familiar with the business lingo or financial lingo that they're using, see if you can start to catch those words that I'm picking up on and how I'm drawing these conclusions, right? Ultimately, this channel is to help educate people who are trying to learn about Ripple and XRP, and really understand this complex global system that's being developed by Ripple Labs. It's really challenging. So hopefully with any luck, we can both figure out what's really going on here together, right? So without any further ado, let's hop into this, and we're going to listen to our instructor, or our moderator Charles here, introduce Norman first.
Thank you, Ahmed. So you've touched on a lot of the major issues here, and on the one hand, you point out that fintech can be used by central banks to increase the efficiency of the payment system. There are definitely issues on international cooperation, and actually a question that I think would be interesting to hear the people's comments on is whether the regulation of fintech is in some way fundamentally different than the problem that we've faced for a number of years of how to regulate the shadow banking system. Okay, our next speaker is Norman Chan, who's the chief executive of the Hong Kong Monetary Authority.
Thank you, Charles. First of all, let me thank Thomas and Christine for hosting this fantastic conference. It's very, very lively discussion, very, very fruitful. My comments really relate just to the CBDC. Charles gave a very useful overview, and Tobias, as usual, representing the IMF, is many steps ahead of us. He's talking about synthetic CBDC. I'm a couple of steps behind, so I'll be just talking about the genuine CBDC as we know it.
So again, this panel right here, you're not learning about Ripple. I'm sorry, guys. If you really came here to learn just about Ripple XRP, I'm beyond that personally. And I do intend to eventually go into videos discussing Ripple, XRP, its ledger, its blockchain, how it works, all that. But really, there's so many people out there that have done that kind of content already, and they've done it exceptionally well. So if anybody's really interested in that, I'll just find those videos that I feel are really good on it, and I can link it to anybody in the comments below that's actually interested in learning about Ripple's blockchain technology specifically. But as a environment, the reason that I'm really focused on what these people were saying, especially in relation to central bank distributed currencies, is because they're like the CBDCs are like a mask for Ripple, right? And it's a mask that a different mask that it can wear in every country. so that everybody thinks that it's a different currency in every country. The idea is that the idea of a one world currency scares most people, especially Western people, right? Because of their religion. Most Westerners' religion does not permit such a thing to come into existence. It's a sign of the end times, and so I think what we're seeing is them being very cautious about how they introduce any such system, because they don't want to make people think that, this is the end times or some craziness, because people are irrational, especially when it comes to their religious beliefs, So it's really important to keep in mind that, off of the conspiratorial tangent there, that these systems are being developed not just for like the stability of, society, but also for the stability of the individuals in this room that are talking about this currency, right? As we discussed in our previous panel, where we were listening to Ahmed speak from the Saudi Arabian Monetary Authority, they don't really have a choice. They have to adopt these CBDCs, not because, it's faster or whatever reason that they gave, but because blockchain does pose a serious risk to them. It's a real threat, right? If they don't move with the times, they're going to be gone with the times, right? So I just want to drive that home, why you're listening to a video on CBDCs, at least right now, in regards to when you're a Ripple investor, right? This stuff's important, and it's really important to understand this so that you don't get fudded out when you hear all this talk about all these countries adopting CBDCs and, oh, woe is me, Ripple's going to be replaced by a CBDC, a gated garden. No, that's not going to happen. There's a reason why Brad Garlinghouse is sitting there on a panel while all these people are talking about this, right? So, at any rate, let's continue on.
I would like to share with you our perspectives and views on these three issues. I don't think we have all the answers. It's too early to give the answers, but I want to share with you some observations on three issues. HKM has been very active. There's lots of excitement in Asia, at least, for central banks to be getting into this study research together with private sector technology companies into CBDC. We've been part of it, but these are kind of interim views on this issue. The first one, will CBDC displace conventional currencies? We talk about banknotes. And the second question, is CBDC just a technological innovation? You probably heard the speakers, probably not. And where does CBDC have the most promising prospects? I think the mixed views, and this is something which is a contentious issue. I think more work, more debate will be needed on this one. The first question, in terms of comparing with central bank currencies, central bank issue currencies, we're really comparing with physical banknotes, right? The physical one you use to pay people. But in that sense, I think our view is that a digital CBDC, however designed, would only offer very limited benefits in terms of retail payment for domestic system. Why? Because in many countries, in Hong Kong, for example, the e-wallet, the digital payment, faster payment scheme would enable individual to make payments in domestic currency in split seconds. The difference would be 1 second compared with 3 seconds. So in terms of a digitalized CBDC, compared with banknote, yes, tremendous advantage. Compared with other electronic form or digital form payment, we think that the benefits will be limited. And if you wish to design a retail system that is available to all the people on the streets, then the system, the scalability, the speed is a technological challenge in doing that. For large value, as we know, corporates use bank balances, bank liabilities to transfer, and is usually very efficient. And therefore, the benefits will be quite incremental.
So before he continues on to his next slide, let's just discuss what he was breaking down for you there, right? Everything that he was discussing is domestic use of their traditional currency. Again, we're talking about CBDCs, we're talking about currencies that are going to be used within a nation's border, right? Now, what did he just say? Well, the biggest selling point for Ripple is that it's faster, significantly faster, it's significantly cheaper, and, it's just safer, right? Now, already right out the gate, the CBDC, even at least in domestic, it is faster, but it's not the difference between 3 days and 3 seconds. It's the difference between 3 seconds and 1 second. It's not really a big deal when you're already down into the seconds for transaction times. For it to just be 2 seconds, basically a third as long there, right? So there's that point, and then there's the fact that he was talking about that the fees in domestic transactions aren't really that big for corporations or anybody, because they're carried out through certain channels, through certain corridors to make sure that they're moving, they're flowing as expected, right? So the idea is that at least domestically, CBDCs lack the real value, the intrinsic value that is inherent in Ripple or in XRP specifically, in regards to its cross-border potential, right? Cross-border is really where this digital asset craze has to solidify first. Like the more I've really researched this market, there's a reason why I'm so gung-ho about Ripple. It's not because I think that no other crypto is going to do good. Let's be clear. I think that might be a misunderstanding because I am only covering Ripple on this channel, by and large. But no, I'm so pro Ripple, so pro XRP, because I think that the world, the future digital economy, as we're, the internet of value as we know it, it's going to have to come out in phases, and I think that the financial phase, the intermittent, the remittance market, that's got to be the first place that these currencies have to tackle, because they have to find a niche first where they are not only better than the alternatives, but they're better to the degree that you can't turn it down, right? And by and large, that's where Ripple is with the XRP ledger right now. That before they even put Cobalt layer on top of the Cobalt scalability layer on top of the XRP ledger, they were doing as many transactions as Visa. We don't even know how many they can do now because they don't even talk about it, and it's because Cobalt was supposed to increase the transaction speeds of XRP by like multiple factors, right? Like, so times 10 times 10 times 10. So like I think it's like I'm not even sure. I think it's like over 100 times speed increase that they were expecting from that. So that would take 20,000 transactions to nearly 2 million. So that's a lot of transactions per second. You don't even need that many in the world, I don't think. If it was 100, even if it was 10x, 200,000 transactions per second on top of the original 20,000. I'm pretty sure that's pretty close to global transactions already. If not, it's definitely close enough for them to package things and send the majority of wealth. It'd be scalable to nearly the full world, but Ripple assures us that it's already globally scalable. So whatever the transaction number is, it's big, right? But that's enough interjecting why Ripple is different than a CBDC, and why CBDCs, even though they're not important, are still going to play a critical role in Ripple's adoption. And now, let's find out what the implications of CBDCs are in regards to anti-money laundering and terrorism.
Now, the issue just been highlighted by some speakers is a lot of issue that on AML, CFT, investor protection, consumer protection, that need to be looked into. Because in banknotes, you can't conduct compliance check unless you get somebody on the spot and you ask questions. But for freely transferable CBDC at the retail level, you can't really do ex-ante compliance. Whereas in the banking system, the institution will be somehow accountable to the money they send through the system. They have to know the KYC, they have to do CDD, they have to report suspicious transaction to the law enforcement agency. But of course, post-events, after transfer, something goes wrong, I suppose the law enforcement authorities will be able to trace easier than banknotes. Banknotes, you can't simply trace them. So this is important AML safety implications that need to be addressed.
All right, so what did he just break down? Well, because of their decentralized nature, the blockchain doesn't need to be observed from the banking end. I don't know why I just went into my old-timey, haha, I got you now, Batman, whatever. At any rate, I'm sorry, sometimes I'm just weird. These, and I crack myself up, this is a sign of insanity, right? But, at any rate, the CBDC won't be, it has no need to be regulated on the side of the issuer because it's a fixed system. It's self-regulating, right? That's where the trustless term comes into the, trustless exchange, trustless peer-to-peer transaction, right? It's not really trustless, it's just self-regulated. That's really what the term that they need to start using is, in my opinion, is these are self-regulated systems. You figure out how you want it regulated, you put that into the base protocol of it, and it regulates itself. No human intervention necessary, right? Well, let's see what he has to say about whether CBDCs are just an technological innovation, right? It's just innovation.
I know that in some central banks, the research project is actually undertaken by the FinTech technology department. And I think it will be a mistake to do that because it is not just a technological project. It's have wide implications for monetary policy and banking stability. I think this has been highlighted. I just talk about the technological challenge. If you want to have a decentralized distributed system for all the retail public, then the system will be gigantic. The technological challenge in doing a efficient payment system will be very enormous. But how about liquidity risk? In good times, normal times, it's okay because public corporates have confidence in the banks. They're quite happy to use bank balances to make the usual transaction. But in case of stress or a financial crisis, the switch from commercial bank balances in CBDC could pose great risk to banks in terms of liquidity and even solvency. Some talk about, can we not restrict issuance, the supply of CBDC? Yeah, I'm suppose you can do that. You have power to do that. But once you do that, when there's a high demand from the society, then you have differential pricing. CBDC would command a higher price than commercial bank balances. So you don't have a one-for-one kind of conversion. The monetary policy transmission mechanism will also be affected to the extent that if the public prefer to hold a sizable amount of CBDC as compared to commercial bank balances or commercial bank liabilities, the banks will have a small ability to create credit, and that will also have an impact on monetary transmission mechanism.
So, what was that all about? That was about the fact that, well, by and large here, the fact that the central bank distributed currencies would struggle to stabilize their value in the case of a bank run if you're just relying on that CBDC, right? Now, as we know from the previous panelist, or from Ahmed, who was just speaking on a a similar issue, right? Ahmed broke down that that in such states of risk, high liquidity demand, right? Like a run on the bank, basically, is what he said, right? So we do a bank run. Now, instead of them just giving everybody their CBDCs, what they're going to do is they're going to issue the CBDC as they are selling CBDCs in their possession into their liquidity pool, into the global liquidity, whatever cryptocurrency that is. And what that's going to do is it's going to push the value of that liquidity pool up, which is going to bring the value of their currency up as well, because their currency is going to be, for all intents and purposes, fiat currencies will become pegged to this global store of liquidity, right? While they will initially start out pegged to their physical fiats. Apologies if you could hear the background, but if they're pegged to your traditional fiats at the start, that's all fine and dandy until there's no traditional fiats left, right? Because you exchange them all for these digital CBDC fiats because nobody uses physical cash anymore. Now, granted, this is obviously 5 years down the road or something like that. We're not talking about tomorrow. We're talking about this is what their plan is over the next few years, right? You got something that most people don't realize is that people in power don't think in terms of hours or days, a week, like most of us do, because they have the luxury to look years ahead. These individuals, it's a luxury but a curse. I say luxury, but it's really a curse as well, because you have to look ahead and try and figure out how to deal with these big problems. But at the same time, it's a luxury because they have the assurance of, at least they have a sense of assurance as to where things are going in the next few months. So because of that, then they can extrapolate from those few months to be like, okay, well, if this is what we're going to do in the next few months, let's set this roadmap for like 6 months after that, we'll do this. A year after that, we'll do this, so on and so forth, right? That's how these people are mapping this out. They're not, that's why whenever anybody's like, oh, how could you be so certain that XRP Ripple's going to do good in the long term, right? Well, Mr. Bad Guy Voice, the reason that I think Ripple's going to do so great in the future, in the long term, is because banks, financial institutions, the big companies of the world, the behemoths, the giants, they move in a slow, therefore visible way, right? It's slow movement, but it's, if you're paying attention and you're hip to their jive, watching their crazy freaking financial conferences like what we're doing right here, breaking down this thing that less than 1% of the population will ever actually tune into, at least not until this system's fully implemented, and people are like, how did we miss that? And we'll all be sitting there like, I don't know, how did you? I tried telling you, right? But at any rate, I've gone on a point of a tangent already. Let's find out where CBDCs have the most promising prospects, right? I feel like he's really actually about to reiterate a lot of what I just said here, but we'll find out.
The most promising prospect to me is not the retail, not the domestic RTGS, but cross-border. I think we all know, I think the current system is highly inefficient, highly costly. For those of you who have the experience of banking a check sent by somebody from the United States to Hong Kong, let's say Switzerland, a US dollar check, it would take 14 days if you're lucky, and maybe $50 to actually present it. It's a nightmare. For small value cross-border payments, I think it impedes on financial inclusion. Small guys, SMEs, find it hard. Big corporates, $100 million, no problem, good service, real time. But otherwise, the service is very, very limited. And we don't have really good solution for that. And I think the e-wallet operators, in some cases, have presented some cross-border remittances, highly efficient, very low cost. But going forward, I think the CBDC, I've talked about, CBDC issued by central banks, would have a lot of benefits that can be presented in cross-border payments, both for large value as well as small value. Small value because it's convenient, large value because it's remove counterparty risk. But of course, you have a situation in which at the moment the regimes in the world depend heavily on institutions, intermediaries to do the checking, enforcement. You hold them accountable for wrongful remittances, transfers, but in a decentralized system, who will be doing that? I think this is a big issue that we need to address.
But we don't need to address it. That's such a misnomer question at the end. Everything else he said is basically what I already talked about, so I'm just going to jump to his misnomer at the end. Who's going to do this? The computer, my friend. My friend Norman Chan, you should be hip to this. So is it because is that a rhetorical? Maybe he's actually just setting up this for the next intro. But that I just wanted to point out that who's going to do it? You know, most of us are pretty. I'd hope most of you are somewhat tech savvy enough to realize what a digital asset essentially represents a coded bank, a bank encoded into a program, right? Everything that a bank is, it's this program, we call it blockchain, and that blockchain stores your cryptocurrencies, right? And so when on a global system, when he says we need to figure out who's going to be regulating this, it's like I said before, these are self-regulating systems. That's the point.
Let me conclude. There's a little clock here, in case you don't know. That's the enforcement tool, Charles, for panelists to behave. I think CBDC have certain prospects, but central banks need to be proactive in either one of the two ways or both ways. Tobias talked about a synthetic CBDC. Lunchtime, we talk about a private sector operated digital wallet with backing, with fiat money backing, is stable coins, safe assets.
So, I'm glad I didn't pause when he just said private backing and just let him complete that statement. Because he didn't just say, at lunch we're going to talk about this private company that's sitting here at this table with us, the only one that's in attendance. They make that clear also at some point in this, that Brad Garlinghouse is the only private sector individual involved in this. And apologies, my dog really likes barking at shadows. It's either that or somebody just got here. But, yeah, I think somebody just got here. Apologies for that. But, yes, these are... He literally just said that, we're talking about these CBDCs right now, but later we're going to talk at lunch about this private digital currency and how that is going to be backed by fiat's CBDCs. He's literally saying that, yeah, you're going to make the CBDC currency, you're all going to go out there and make that, and then you're going to back it. And you're going to back it with this private digital currency. Yeah. And if you look to him, he was looking to Tobias, and he was making sure that what he was saying was correct, right? So, such big plays being made, and people don't even realize how big it is because of what he just said right there, right? If you're going to take away anything from this, take away from the concluding thoughts of this man when he just said that at lunch we're going to talk about about the private option and how we can connect all these CBDCs up to that private option to back it, right? Big stuff, big stuff. All right, let's finish this up here.
If that's the approach for private sector to take a lead, but those issues I've just highlighted, AML, cross-border, CFT, safe custody of the collaterals or the float need to be developed. We just can't let private sector to do everything on their own. What if people lose the money? They can't get the money back if the company go bust, just like banks. And therefore, I think central banks have a responsibility to think of some regime that could actually give sufficient protection to consumers and users of these digital currencies. The second approach, which is the one I talk about, is central bank actually issuing CBDC. I'm glad Tobias talked about this ESDRs. I have the same thought. Clearly, dollar will be the kind of a candidate that people would use, private sector especially, to facilitate cross-border payments and transactions. But for people who really want to have stable bilateral exchange rate pair, a basket or SDR type would be an ideal candidate. But the same question, who would be the issuer? Who would be the trusted counterparty or central party to keep custody of those afloat would be an important issue. But the conclusion is that if the central banks or the authorities don't take a proactive step, I think the private sector will be miles ahead. And they are already doing a lot without a appropriate regulatory regime in place. I better stop here. Thank you.
So let's just conclude. Not only is this gentleman, Norman Chan, saying, I think it's really good that we're sitting here talking about adopting these CBDCs, because if we don't, the private sector, it will take over. And who's the private sector? Ripple. And they're in this room. Brad Garlinghouse is in this room, with so many of his close friends sitting on this panel and in the audience before him. Friends at this point, because they're all working towards the same plan. And when you have a similar goal in mind, people tend to become your friends, even if it's just business. Just business friends can be more powerful than your best friend from high school. Pardon me. So, at the end here, I just want to conclude how pivotal this point in history was, and how pivotal this moment, this panel specifically was, right? This is an hour and a half that I've managed to grab now almost 3 hours worth of content to break down for you out of, right? And we still have 30 minutes left. We still have one final panelist that everybody wants to hear from, and the Q&A. And the Q&A is so interesting, because the Q&A is where we get to talk about perhaps the best sales pitch of all time that I think I witnessed a sales pitch is what I'm going to point out, right? But we're gonna finish up this in our next, hopefully maybe our next 2 videos we should be done. If I can get another 15 minutes out of and then just 5-10 minutes of commentary on top of that, like this. But yeah, at any rate, as always, I hope you've enjoyed this content. If you have, be sure hit that like. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe. And if you really enjoyed it, be sure to ring that bell so you can stay up to date with all my content, so that you can be up to date when I release my next part of this, where I believe we are talking with Brad Garlinghouse. Don't quote me yet, but I believe I'm almost certain he's the next person to speak. So, with that said, I've been Jade Martian. You've been watching The Martian Report, and as always, I can't wait to see you in my next video on Mars.